Have you ever found yourself talking out loud while driving? Or explaining something out loud when nobody else was around? Maybe in the shower, or during a walk. And if someone suddenly appeared at that exact moment, you'd probably feel embarrassed. But what few people realize is that there's a surprisingly good chance you're sharing a habit that's remarkably common among some of the most reflective minds. And that's just the first of 5 unusual behaviors that may reveal an intelligence far rarer than you realize. So pay close attention, because the more of these 5 habits you recognize in yourself, the more this video is going to make sense. Number 1. Talking to yourself. Some people do it without even realizing it. In the car, in the shower, or even while they're cooking. And there's almost always a pattern behind it. They're not just talking. They're organizing something. An idea. A decision. A conversation that never fully ended inside their own mind. Most people assume this habit is just an eccentricity. But psychology tends to see it a little differently. Because when you talk to yourself, something interesting happens. Confusing thoughts become clearer. Ideas gain structure. And problems often seem much simpler than they did just a few minutes earlier. That's why many highly reflective people engage in this habit without even noticing it. Not because they're trying to sound intelligent, but because some minds think better when they can actually hear their own thoughts. And for some people, thinking in silence simply isn't enough. Perhaps that's exactly why this habit appears so often among people whose way of thinking tends to be far rarer than most realize. Number 2. Having entire conversations in your head. Have you ever imagined an entire conversation before it even happened? You thought about what you were going to say. You imagined the other person's response. And then you responded to that response too. Maybe it happened before a meeting, before an important message, or before a difficult conversation that hadn't even taken place yet. Most people do this from time to time, but some do it far more often. And what's most interesting is that these imagined conversations are rarely just fantasies. More often, they function as a kind of mental simulation, a way to test possibilities, explore different scenarios, and anticipate how situations might unfold. That's why highly reflective people tend to spend so much time inside their own minds. Not because they're disconnected from reality, but because their minds are constantly exploring alternative versions of it. And the more complex the situation, the more likely this inner dialogue is to appear. Some people use these imagined conversations as a kind of mental rehearsal, a simulation of reality, not because they believe they can predict exactly what will happen, but because exploring possibilities helps them organize their thoughts, understand different perspectives, and feel more prepared for complex situations. And that's why what seems unusual to other people can sometimes be one of the quietest signs of an uncommon emotional intelligence. Number 3. Feeling comfortable with silence. This may seem like a simple thing, but for many people, silence is uncomfortable. That's why they turn on the television as soon as they get home, play music while they work, or look for some kind of distraction whenever things become too quiet. But some people do exactly the opposite. They don't rush to fill the silence. They stay in it. And what's most interesting is that they don't feel lonely when they do. They feel at peace. Because to them, silence doesn't feel empty. It feels like space. Space to think, to reflect, to organize ideas that would normally get lost in the noise of everyday life. That's why highly reflective people often have a very different relationship with silence. While some people see it as a lack of stimulation, they see it as an opportunity to hear their own thoughts without interruption. And perhaps that's exactly why so many of them end up enjoying time alone. Not because they dislike being around other people, but because few things offer the same kind of clarity as a few minutes of genuine silence. Number 4. You observe more than you participate. Have you ever noticed that in some conversations, certain people do most of the talking and hardly listen to anyone else, while others seem to be paying attention to everything? Not just the words, but the facial expressions, the tone of voice, the pauses, and even the subtle changes in behavior that almost nobody else notices. If you tend to do this, you've probably heard people describe you as quiet. reserved, or even distant. But many times, the reality is exactly the opposite. You're so busy observing that you don't always feel the need to speak. And there's an interesting reason for that. While some people are busy thinking about what they're going to say next, others are noticing things that were never actually said. It's like a detective. While most people focus on what's being spoken, a detective pays attention to what was revealed without meaning to be. That's why they often notice things that others completely miss. A sudden shift in someone's mood, an insecurity hidden behind a joke, or that strange feeling that someone is saying one thing while feeling something entirely different. And although this isn't always conscious, this ability to observe tends to be connected to a pattern that appears repeatedly in highly reflective people. Because the more attention you give to human behavior, the more information your brain learns to pick up. And perhaps that's exactly why some of the most unusual minds aren't the ones that talk the most. They're the ones that notice the most. But there's one final behavior that may reveal a highly reflective mind more clearly than all the others, because it tends to appear in the exact moments when most people act on impulse. And once you understand this last habit, the previous four start to make even more sense. Number 5. You take longer to respond than most people. Have you ever heard someone say, "You think too much"? Or, "Why did it take you so long to reply?" Maybe it happened during a conversation, in a text message, or in a moment when someone expected an immediate answer. But what many people interpret as indecision is sometimes just reflection, because some minds have a habit of analyzing before reacting. They consider possibilities, evaluate consequences, notice details that other people overlook, and only then do they reach a conclusion. That doesn't mean they're always right, but it does mean they don't like responding on autopilot. While some people react to their first impression, others feel the need to understand a situation more deeply before taking a position, and that can make their responses slower, but it can also make them more thoughtful, because there's an important difference between reacting and truly reflecting. And perhaps that's exactly what connects every behavior on this list. Talking to yourself, having entire conversations in your head, feeling comfortable with silence, observing more than you participate. None of these habits prove intelligence on their own, but they all point in the same direction. A mind that spends more time analyzing, organizing, and trying to understand the world around it. And that kind of mind is far rarer than most people realize. If you recognized yourself in several of these habits, you're probably not as unusual as you've always thought. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more insights into human behavior and psychology.